In 3D Max, the way to move around the scenes is this here, which we call pivot or gizmo. And this is a Cartesian system of coordinates. If you observe, when we move the cursor around the scene, these screens here at the bottom change, and they select depending on the distance we are from the axis, both in positive and negative. The method for selecting objects and moving them in 3D Max is this icon here. Select and move. While holding this down, you can select objects and move them around the scene, using the handles on the pivots that we mentioned earlier. We can select one axis and move it on that. Or we could select two if we wanted. Pressing here, we'd select X and Y, and we could move on Z or Y. This way, we can move our objects wherever we need to. You need to bear in mind that the axis on the pivot depends on the view in which we are working. You shouldn't assume that the Z-axis will be the height in the perspective view of front and top. As you can see here, the axis that corresponds to the height in this perspective is Y. Depending on the view, the pivot will act one way or another, and we need to pay attention to this. If we right-click on the icon we saw previously, select and move, we get this panel. This shows us the absolute coordinates of the object's world, and on the right, the local ones. You need to consider that when you're modeling, you usually work with the object centered on the coordinate axis. This gives us some advantages that allows our model to be a lot simpler when we apply symmetry or other procedures that maximize our workflow. When we select our cube, we see the coordinates of the object in relation to its world. If we right-click on these arrows, it goes down to 0. So right-clicking, we can center our object to the center of the world. Now you can see the axis is 0 on every one. Okay, let's talk about the selection tools in 3D Max. To select, you just need to click and drag, like any other software. In 3D Max, there are a few options that we can apply when selecting. We have it in this area of the panel. To begin with, we have this option here, Window Crossing, which will select whatever is selected within the box that we've made. So if I have these two shapes and I make this selection, I'll only select the cube. On the other hand, if it was deactivated and I made the same selection, then both would be selected, as you see. The next icon is the shape of the selection, so to speak. If you hold it down, you get different selection shapes, like a spray for example, or to select by polygons. The next option selects by name. If we had a very large scene with lots of objects, we could insert the name of the object if everything is properly organized, and we could find the layers very easily. This panel is for a filter that we can apply to see only what we want, so only lights and geometry, or whatever we need. This here is very interesting. It's the selection filter. What this does is to filter and select whatever we decide. So in this case, all is selected. If we had very large scenes with lights, camera, etc., and if we wanted to access only the cameras and the lights, we'd go to the filter and select lights, for instance. When we select now, only the lights are selected, not the geometry. If we change it to geometry, then only this would be selected. A final option that's interesting is creating groups. If we make a selection, let's go back to all, we can select two objects and in group, we can make a group out of them. There we could give it a name, and in this area we can see how our two objects have grouped. Now if we wanted to select in Select and Move, as you see, you can make a group selection. This acts like one object. This is used quite often to organize our project or apply effects to the whole group. If you select and go to Edit, you see that this acts as one object. So if you add effects or whatever you wanted, they would be added to the whole group as one. Okay, let's delete this effect, and in case you wanted to undo the group selection, just go to Group and select Ungroup, and the elements would go back to being independent objects.